we sometimes feel like we need to defend our ideas or our identity. If I can bring some tenderness and compassion to that normal and natural human response and hopefully soften it a little bit, just allows me then to hopefully open up to something that might be, more fruitful engagement with my own inner world and the possibilities in there, or more fruitful engagement in a dialogue with somebody else. Just noticing that there is a need for us to remind each other of the things that matter most and our sort of most highest or most sacred values. I think that in itself can be a good starting point.
Welcome, beautiful souls. For those of you that are not yet members of All That We Are, we would love for you to join. Our next Soul Space is July the 11th, and we also have our global forgiveness field online happening on July 26th. I hope to see you at these two events. And those of you that can get to Somerset, do come to my full moon ritual on July 18th. It's the last event that I'm hosting in that beautiful yurt. Some of you have been asking which festivals you can find me at this summer. I will be at Noisley this weekend in the Mind, Body, Soul area, hosting a cacao ceremony at 3 p.m. on Saturday and a panel on the theme of We Are Love on the Sunday at 2 p.m. And I will have a group of special guests, including Bruce Parry and Helly Cameron. I will also be assisting Luke McSwinney's breathwork session at 12 p.m, which will be excellent. You can also find me at Wilderness on the Friday, speaking about intuition and in conversation with Sam Lee. And I will be speaking at Medicine Festival on the theme of stepping into spiritual leadership. And then I will be back at Heart of the Rose for all the sisters in early September. My guest today is Louis Weinstock, a transpersonal child psychotherapist and social entrepreneur. He helps people find a light in the darkness, especially in grief, in the shadow, in the things that are unseen, unheard, unspoken. For over 20 years, he has expertly guided children and grown-ups through some of the toughest challenges life can throw at us: loss, trauma, divorce, burnout, and breakdowns. He is also co-founder of A Part of Me, a multi-award-winning charity that helps young people transform their grief into compassion. His work has been featured on the BBC, ITV, and in The Guardian newspaper. His book, How the World is Making Our Children Mad and What to Do About It, was published by Penguin in June 2021 and won a Gold Award from the prestigious Nautilus Book Awards. He lives in Manchester with his wife and daughter. Some of you will know him from our Alchemy and Activism workshop we did some years ago together at Fitzrovia Chapel. In this episode, called Windows of Tolerance, we explore the themes of the attention economy, children's mental health, and grief as we speak to the question, how can we reclaim and build the capacity for our inner wisdom in a world of distraction? We explore how to face climate anxiety and grief to live a healthy life, how technology is affecting our children and us, how we can reclaim our inner wisdom and simplicity, honoring our defenses, building our capacities for uncomfortable feelings and finding fruitful engagement with our inner world, how to be discerning in choosing healing modalities and therapies that suit us, 5 rhythms practice, and how dancing shifts and heals grief and trauma. We hope that this conversation supports you in reforming your relationship with technology, the way you parent, and guides you to live from a place of more support, presence, and compassion. Welcome to All That We Are, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between activism, the sacred, creativity, and regeneration, the spaces where our inner and outer worlds dance. From healing trauma to nature connection, to new technologies to ancient wisdom, it's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a more beautiful future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to listen, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing and envisioning, we create the futures of our wildest dreams. And we begin to embody all that we are becoming, and all that is possible. Just Louis, it is an absolute delight to welcome you to all that we are. Thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Amisha.
What comes to you when I ask you, what are the futures of your wildest dreams?
A return to simplicity and coming back to the things that really matter the most for human beings, which usually are quite simple. So I imagine a world where people are less distracted in this, crazy attention economy world, and they are able to really focus on the things that matter most, which includes, for me at least, it includes just being present with loved ones, being kind, being compassionate to ourselves as much as to others and to the more than human world. So, yeah, I think for me, it's returning to that simplicity. I don't really want to complicate it more than that.
As simple as all of those things are, they are not so easy.
No, they're not so easy. They're not so easy, but sometimes it requires a conscious choice. One of the things that I like to remind myself of and the people I work with is that we have often more power than we realize. And sometimes just recognizing the power of making a conscious choice in a moment to be present, making a conscious choice to be kind or compassionate or forgiving. As you say, it's not always easy. And, we could talk about what some of the barriers might be, external or internal barriers. But I do think it's helpful to remember that on one level, it does come down to making a choice and remembering. If anything, one of the hardest things is just to remember that we have a choice, or to remember to turn our attention and our energy in a particular way, in a particular direction. Yeah, I think that is the hardest thing because of all the distractions that modern life has. It's really hard to remember. And that's one of the reasons why I am particularly interested in some of the religious structures that have evolved over thousands of years. And in some ways, a lot of those structures are just about reminding people. Obviously, there's a lot that's really not good about religion, but there's some good things in there. And one of the things I think is just finding ways to remind people about the things that matter most. If we sort of throw the baby of religion out with the bathwater, it's quite difficult in the 21st century, I think, to navigate life without those sort of structures, those reminders, and that community that can help us, which I guess is in some ways what you're doing here with this podcast and this community.
Yeah, but I don't know if things like this can replace the power of local, physical, multi-generational gatherings that actually invite everyone to remember the sacred together.
No, I think you're right. And it's a tricky one. And I'm not sure what the answer is really. But just noticing that there is a need for us to remind each other of the things that matter most and our sort of most highest or most sacred values. I think that in itself can be a good starting point.
A big part of our future is, of course, our children. I know such a strong part of the work that you have been doing is around children and their mental health and parenting and families and how we navigate these times. And so I wonder if you would be happy to share with us a little bit around first what we're up against and why parents may be finding these times difficult, and how
children might be navigating these times in ways that, their parents even don't know about, or other parents haven't thought, oh, this might be going on for my kids in these times.
Right, yes. So what we're up against as parents or anyone who cares about raising children, I've thought about this a lot. And in some ways, you can say that lots of things that are happening now, there's always been some element of that. With the sort of criticisms of digital technology, people of a certain leaning will say, well, look at the backlash that happened when books were being printed en masse, and people had a moral panic about that. But I do think there are some things that are particularly different about this age. And in my work, I have a particular focus on technology. So I don't really apologize for focusing on that, because I do think it's making such a significant difference and a challenge to our lives, especially for parents who are raising children. The obvious thing to say is just how addictive these devices are. You see it all the time. And by the way, I am definitely not a saint in this area, and we aren't saints as parents. Like, what I've been noticing, particularly recently with Rose, is and Rose is my daughter, by the way, she's 5 now. When she wants my attention, which is what kids want, by the way, they really want and need parents' attention. It's like a life-giving force for them. It's necessary for their development to have attention. It sometimes feels really, really difficult to be present. And without any doubt, a large part of that is the feeling that I'm carrying inside my body and my nervous system, that I've got a whole other world out there online on my computer and my phone that I need to keep on top of. And the thing that I am particularly conscious of is the sort of proliferation of different platforms, social media platforms, messaging devices, work collaboration tools, and even blogging tools and podcasts and everything else. Like the deluge of information and messages and communications and content makes it really, really, really hard for me to be present with my child. And I think I have some skills. Like, I practiced meditation since I was a teenager, on and off. I think I have some powers to bring my attention back to where I would like it to be. But even in that context, I find it really hard sometimes to be present with my daughter. As I say that, I do sense a feeling of sadness that I have tuned into before, which I think can be the sadness can be a portal, for me at least. If I notice that, I think the sadness is sort of often showing us some area of our lives where there's something missing, that we're aware that something isn't working. And if we relate to our sadness in the right way, it can really help us to make better choices. It's not the only thing that helps. I'm aware of it coming up in this moment, and I'm just noticing it and sharing it in case, you or some of your listeners might connect to a similar feeling when they reflect on how difficult it is to be present with their kids. I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. I work with a lot of parents who have really similar struggles and issues. And of course, it's not just to do with the parents, it's the kids who are on their devices as well, which are also, really, really pulling their attention in very powerful ways.
And not just in the parenting context. It's often that I'm with a group of people and, you're somewhere like doing something together. And then there are these moments, everyone just goes into their phone for half an hour. That didn't used to be part of how we used to hang out. And then like someone starts and then everyone does it and then everyone's lost and then everyone like loses focus and some people are in the conversation and some people are not. And this has become a very normal part of how we spend time together as humans now.
Yes, it really has. And that makes it difficult because it's become so normalized. And one thing that I really love as a theory, and I'm sure you've come across this, is the sort of mimetic theory from René Girard, which in my sort of limited understanding of it, just means that humans are creatures who we're really deeply wired to imitate what we see around us. One of my favorite stories, which I use to articulate this, which I put in my book, which is called How the World is Making Our Children Mad and What to Do About It. It's a story when my daughter Rose she was about two and a bit, and I took her to this soft play in Finsbury Park. It was a really small but really fun soft play. So they had like these sort of machine guns that cannonballed these colorful balls that you could feed across to the other side of the room. And there was like gerbils and pets that you could stroke. And there was all amazing slides and things like that. In the corner of this soft play, there was this one green tractor ride that, to me anyway, just looked like the most dull thing in the world. It just rocked slowly backwards and forwards and made this sort of really dull tractor-like noise, and you had to put 20p in to operate it. But when we got into this soft play, Rose saw that there was another boy on that tractor. Because she saw there was another boy on that tractor, she decided she had to get on that tractor. And she tried to climb on whilst the boy was there. I had to stop her from getting on and pull her back, and she had to wait. And eventually the boy got off and she got in, and she was so happy, so excited that she's now sitting in the green tractor. And I put 20p in, and the tractor just started moving back and forward really in this dull, boring way, making this dull tractor-like sound. And you could see she just wasn't having any fun at all. But she also refused to get off because she's seen something that somebody else wanted that was a scarce thing. And now she's got it and she didn't want to get off, even though all the other kids were having so much fun in the rest of the soft play. So that's one of my favorite sort of moments and stories of realizing, gosh, we really it's quite deeply ingrained that we want what other people have or what we see other people doing, and we just follow it blindly, even when it might make us suffer or it might not bring us joy or peace or fulfillment.
Then when you said all the others were having fun in the soft play, I wonder why that didn't make her want to jump back in there, or what made her want to then stay in the tractor and watch others having fun over there.
I mean, this is obviously my interpretation, but I feel like it was because she's seen something that somebody else had that was scarce. In other words, there's only one seat on the tractor. That made her just really want to get on it. And once she got on it, she realized that if she got off it, somebody else might get on it. So it was like protecting her position in this thing that she's seen in this environment that was perceived as being valuable or attractive.
And I think most humans can relate to not really wanting something, but not wanting anyone else to have it either.
I think so. I think so. Yeah. Well, that's why I love this theory of mimetic desire, which in my simple understanding is that we just really want what other people have, even when it doesn't make us happy or bring us fulfillment or any of the good things. That can apply to parenting and to raising children as much as it can to anything else, especially I think in the age of social media in particular. You know, there's parenting experts flying around everywhere, sort of showing the way to do things. And then you have parents who are showcasing the best of their kids. And you'd very, very, very rarely see somebody showcasing when it goes horribly wrong, when you feel like you've got no control whatsoever and you feel on the edge of burnout and your kid's not listening to you and you feel completely under-resourced and your mental health is strained. Like, you very rarely see that in the public domain. I just think social media creates just a really intense and false idea of what reality is like, and that can cause parents to suffer, I think.
An idea that other people are managing better than you are at it, and they're actually like flying and they've had time to do their makeup and they're like,
Yes.
their homes are really tidy and all of that. And then that kind of like, that's not my reality. And I feel like that also applies to everyone in the modern world, because we're so bombarded with imagery of what other people are doing. And I find that in the work that I do, that comparison jealousy, like self-doubt, but around comparison is just like the most prevalent thing. And actually, people find it very hard to not compare themselves to others.
Yeah, well, I think it's hard because it's just built in. I think it's part of our nature is to compare ourselves to others. And, we have feelings of envy and resentment that seem to be universal. I think that's what makes it hard. It's just that it gets accentuated in the world of social media. So, as a human being in the world or as a parent, whatever you're doing, before the age of digital technology and social media, you would always have been comparing yourself to other people. That saying of keeping up with the Joneses. I'm pretty sure that came quite a few decades ago. So that's always been the case. It just feels like it's intensified and accentuated. And the other thing which I really feel so strongly about is because we're plugged into this digital nervous system that's constantly, delivering us little shocks and messages and emotional hits, we don't give ourselves generally, and I can say this for myself too, although I am getting better at it, we don't give ourselves enough time to process and digest all of this material that we're being exposed to. So for me, what I'm trying to do more and more for myself and for my family and supporting the people I work with is just really creating strong boundaries around unplugging and really doing pretty much nothing. Like to actually process and digest, you really can't just move on to the next distraction or the next screen based thing. I just don't think we work like that. I think we really need to be doing something, whether it's walking in nature, moving, dancing, just lying down and being still, just things where we're unplugged and we can allow our bodies to digest. Because I think our bodies are incredibly intelligent. Like our bodies can process so much stuff if we just give them the time and the space to do that. You've probably seen some of the videos of animals who shake off trauma. Have you seen those? Like the polar bear and
Yeah, absolutely. My dog Shambo, he does that all the time.
yeah,
Every time you like pick him up, put him down, or you take off his collar, like his harness, any change, he does a whole shake.
shakes it off.
It's amazing.
It is amazing. So that is a completely natural and instinctual response to releasing or processing some energy in the body. And I think human beings can access that, but we obviously need to switch off from the external influences and tune into something that might feel more like a natural response to a situation.
It's interesting what you were saying was that we need to process what happens, like what all the things that we're exposed to on social media. Something that I've noticed is that I used to be really good at processing things that had just happened in my actual life, like in my actual reality of the humans that were around me or the interactions that I had. And I noticed at some point that what used to be those quiet moments in between things, that's often where I reach for the phone and where I think collectively we reach for the phone. It used to be that if I was waiting for somebody or if I was traveling somewhere or if I just finished something or just was preparing to start something, that I was really good at being quiet and still during those times. And I feel like something happened in my world during the pandemic, and I didn't really know what Instagram stories were for a while. And then one day I pressed on them. It's just like, oh no. And it just opened a whole wormhole. So actually, a lot of the space that used to be for processing what was just happening in life and creating those quiet moments then would go into absorbing more images, information, quotes, videos of people's faces, pictures of people doing something else somewhere else in the world. And then where's the space to process that, as you say?
Yeah. Even as we're talking about this, there's something that I feel like I want to name, which is there's a part of me that's going, oh, but this conversation has been had so many times, and we need to be. Let's talk about things that are new and shiny and interesting. And I think that might be a helpful inner voice or a part to bring into the conversation because I have a feeling that that is also, we can also, it's easy to sort of say, oh, blame the outside world, digital technology, social media, corruption, capitalism. It's easy to get stuck in that place. But a more empowering place that I find is to notice what are the internal patterns that are also driving us to make certain choices. So I just noticed that voice coming in saying, "Oh, this is, this conversation has been had before. Yeah, let's get to some interesting, shiny new things." And in a way, I feel like that if we fuel that part too much, that is what's fueling the attention economy and taking us away from what I started the conversation with, which is the simplicity and focusing really on what matters most.
And there's something around reclaiming more space for our own inner wisdom. Only we can do that. And the world is only going to probably get more shiny and fast around us. And we can drop in AI and a few of the shinier things that are coming. And actually, what we're talking about is recognizing like how far we may have already lost that ability to come back into that choice. So, how important it is as more advanced technology is really just around the corner, that we take this pause to get a grip on ourselves. And because for me, the pandemic definitely various other challenges around life that came up through that time. And I feel that most people that I speak to have been through a lot in the last few years. In different ways, different things might have happened, but we have all been through it with our inner worlds and our understanding of who we are, the resilience that we've had to find. And so it's also a time where more of our dependencies might have crept in. And of course, during that time, the algorithms of all of these things have also deepened and got more intense. And so it does feel important just to have this conversation now and say, let's reclaim something. Let's remember that we can choose today to reset the way in which we use our technology.
Thank you so much for framing it in that way. I thought that was really lovely and helpful. And it makes me think of particularly the tendency that I think sometimes we have, and I definitely have, to sort of lean on external authority for telling us what to do. And, we can trace that back to childhood and how we are raised, how we were raised, and the level of autonomy or not with which we were raised. And there's definitely been some changes in that over the years. From what I can see, parenting has become more and more risk averse in many ways. And so we end up giving our children less and less autonomy. And that can create a dynamic where we really feel helpless and that we need other people to tell us what to do, whether it's experts or whether it's the latest, AI chatbot or somebody you found on YouTube. And I'm not denying the helpfulness of things that are out there, by the way. But I just wanted to share that to sort of tune into your point, which I think is really important for you and for me as well, about inner wisdom and how can we just notice the pattern that takes us to a place of perhaps feeling more helpless and feeling that we need other people to tell us what to do, and how can we bring ourselves back in to a sense of what you could call inner wisdom. The one example that just comes to mind, well, there's a couple of examples that come to mind for me, but one distinction I heard recently, which I thought was so helpful, from a coach in America actually called Steve Chandler, who said, anytime you find yourself saying, I don't know how to, I don't know who to, or I don't know what, if you find yourself asking yourself any of those sorts of questions, or even the sense of that, it's really good to catch yourself in that moment and notice that pattern. And his sort of reframe of that was, if I gave you £1,000,000 to figure it out, would you figure it out? And of course, 99% of the time you would figure it out. I just thought that was such a helpful reframe to catch that pattern, because that sort of pattern can take us away from our inner wisdom. It's reminding ourselves that we do know, but we have to catch the pattern that takes us away from our inner wisdom. That's what I'm particularly interested in. And a lot of my work is around noticing these patterns. I call them patterns, just sort of like recurring psychological themes that can get in the way of us accessing inner resources like inner wisdom.
It's a really interesting theme, like inner authority, inner wisdom. And also, I feel like for many people that are really conscientious around their healing and their relationship with themselves, also then not wanting to have blind spots or do the wrong thing, that can also really creep up in and undermine inner wisdom. And then, of course, we're in an age of narcissism as well, where having very set ideas that have very clear blind spots that aren't taking the situation really into account can also creep in and be a very clear, like, inner authority that's ungrounded. And so this whole area of inner authority is incredibly challenging.
Yes, I get what you're saying. In other words, what you want to just highlight is there's a danger in sort of claiming some inner authority that you become inflexible and or even potentially narcissistic, like I know best and nobody else can tell me what to do. Is that kind of what you're pointing to?
Well, I'm not trying to point to anything really. I'm just curious as to how we sort of navigate there's a spectrum, I guess, with our relationship with inner authority. And some people will be more on the doubting themselves and not feeling confident to trust themselves. And other people will be more on the I know everything and be unopen to listen and learn and evolve. So there's quite a wide spectrum of what might get in the way of someone being able to come into that space of inner authority.
Yes, totally agree with you. And what comes to mind for me is I get a sense from my body when I'm being defended or defensive around a particular way of seeing things or a particular way of doing things. I can feel it in my body. It feels a bit tense, sometimes a bit anxious. My shoulders hunch over sometimes. And for me, it helps me to just notice that pattern in my body and accepting that that is just part of being a human being. That, as much as a dog might defend their territory, we sometimes feel like we need to defend our ideas or our identity. But I think for me, if I can bring some tenderness and compassion to that normal and natural human response and hopefully soften it a little bit, just allows me then to hopefully open up to something that might be, more fruitful engagement with my own inner world and the possibilities in there, or more fruitful engagement in a dialogue with somebody else.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are enjoying this episode, do join our membership. For a small contribution, you can be part of our community, where we deepen the conversation and offer spaces of learning and embodiment. As a member, you are a patron supporting the making of this show, keeping the episodes full length, free and accessible for all. And you receive a number of benefits, such as monthly soul space, going deeper sessions, access to our library of workshops, and discounts on all our online and in-person experiences. Our membership is what makes us able to make this show and stay advertising free in a world that is always trying to sell us stuff we don't need. Head to allthatweare.org/membership to find out more and join today. Technology is one of your main focuses around where we're at. I'm curious what your thoughts are around climate change and children and teenagers and that aspect of mental health. I was at a little gathering last week, and in most of the children in my life are young, like under 5 or under 7. But I was sat with some mothers of teenagers, and they were telling me about the really high levels of anxiety that their kids have. And a lot of it is around the future, and they're learning in school around climate change and they're also really exposed to social media and on their Snapchat, and that it's like a whole other identity that you have to have. I mean, school was hard enough without all of that. So I don't know how teenagers do it now with having to also fit into like the rankings of high school dynamics, like online as well as in person, and do all their homework. Although I have heard that a lot of them are using AI now to do their homework, and that the teachers haven't cottoned on yet that
Mm-hmm.
that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder what's alive for you around how young people are navigating climate change, and how, as parents, they can support that journey.
One trend that is I'm seeing happening is children, even as young as 5 and 6, putting pressure on parents because of what they're learning about climate. So I had a conversation with a friend the other day who the dad is a pilot and the daughter is 5, and she's been learning about climate change, and she's been telling her dad that she wants him to change his job, and he's really considering it, which is quite incredible to see that sort of I guess you could call it upwards pressure, that maybe that is a positive thing. I mean, in many ways it could be a positive thing. It does sometimes create tensions in families where, children or young people may have very strong views about climate and the environment, and that can clash with parents. I don't think that's a particularly new dynamic, because every generation has a similar kind of tension or a set of tensions, because ultimately we're from different generations which typically have different values. And the other thing that I work with a lot is climate anxiety and climate grief. So I have some clients that I've worked with who have experienced quite profound climate anxiety and climate grief. Some who end up having panic attacks. And there was one boy who he'd basically started to research online. This is going back a few years, like what was happening with climate change, and he started to get really, really despondent and hopeless and despairing. But he didn't really want to tell anyone, so he dropped out of school because he just didn't care anymore. His mum just pulled him out because he wasn't doing the work. And he ended up coming to see me, and after a few sessions, we discovered that he had been researching this stuff. This was the thing that made him go into this kind of just completely hopeless, energetic experience. And at first, I was trying my best to, chivvy him along and give him like the optimistic frame and saying, well, look, why don't you channel your energy into something positive, like an XR rebellion or the Youth XR, or like channel it into something positive, so at least you feel like you're doing something. But all of my efforts were met with resistance. And what I learned, and I'm very grateful for this lesson actually, is I learned that to help this person, I had to really allow myself to be in that space with them, alongside them, that sort of space of hopelessness and looking at that really worst possible future that he was really feeling into, without trying to make it all better. And it was only through that shared connection and experience emotionally and energetically that we were then able to have a more fruitful conversation. So I think, like, sort of anyone who might be working or supporting or raising children who are carrying these strong emotional responses to, I mean, it's not just about the climate, is it? The reality is we actually have now, it feels like we have multiple existential risks that are being talked about a lot. AI is the latest version of that. In some ways, it feels like these existential risks themselves are accelerating, and whether they're connected or not, that may be a different conversation. So for me, anyone who's supporting children, probably the best sort of advice that I can offer is try as much as you can to be alongside them in terms of their actual direct emotional experience. Because typically, what we want to do, and any listeners who are parents will know this, you just want to make it better. Yeah, if your child is crying, you want to make it better. You want to cheer them up. You want to, rattle something in front of them, distract them, give them something sweet. And everyone does that to some extent. But I think sometimes it's so helpful just to try and find a way to be with them in that emotional space. And that does require that you have to a certain extent, allow yourself to be in that emotional space, whether it's the fear or the hopelessness. And I'm not saying, by the way, that that's easy. I don't think it is easy, but I think there are ways that we can slowly and gently and kindly tune into those spaces. And I think that's so important to do.
Absolutely. I feel like that's such an important aspect of how we really meet the times that we're living in as parents, and also as children, as siblings, as friends, that being able to actually be in the darkness is such a powerful part of the process. My mother has a degenerative disease, and there was a chapter where like a lot changed really, really quickly, and it was really, really full on and intense. And I understood that it wasn't about trying to make it better at that time. And it wasn't about me like keeping myself super elevated and, and high vibe. It was about sitting with her in that grief and despair and fear, and actually going through that process together and being a companion, being part of that process. And I feel like often this is something that you and I have talked about before, that there's such a strong narrative around spiritual work and healing work to constantly kind of get to this sort of better place and this higher place and this place where everything's light, and so much gets lost of the actual process if we're not able to actually be with the darkness as a process.
I obviously agree with you wholeheartedly. Something practical that has helped me and has helped some of the people I work with, if people want to build up the muscle, if you like, to be with what we could call the darkness, I like to work with questions, like inquiry type of questions. And one of the ones that I find helpful to connect with that place that is, in some ways in the shadows or in darkness, is just saying or asking yourself, like, what's really difficult for me to accept right now? And if you let that question drop in and you bring as much kindness and compassion and acceptance to what comes up in your body, particularly paying attention to what comes up in your body. And if you notice feelings in the body that come up that feel difficult, you can put a hand there and just let those feelings know it's okay for them to be there. That simple process is a way I find of really building our muscle and capacity to be with the darkness or to be with the uncomfortable. And very often, Amisha, it's really important to say that the things that we avoid, the feelings and the situations that we avoid, it's usually because of some conditioned reflex that isn't actually true. Like, for example, with emotions like grief and sadness and fear, very often we have a conditioned response to them that means it's sort of like an internal narrative that says, if I even go anywhere near that feeling, I will be overwhelmed and I won't be able to cope. And part of the work of what you could call healing is sort of dissolving some of those beliefs by actually bringing our attention into the actual embodied experience that we might associate with sadness or grief. And sometimes we definitely need help. And I'm a massive believer in finding others to support us on this journey in groups, in communities. But also, I think there is a way in which we can practice these things in our own space, in our own time. It doesn't have to be some big, dramatic, cathartic experience. It's just, can you build what we call in the psychological world the window of tolerance to these feelings or sensations that are uncomfortable that we probably do so much to avoid without even realizing it. So much of our lives get packaged around avoiding these uncomfortable feelings. And in some ways, I think you could describe much of our modern world as being built upon an avoidance of difficult or uncomfortable feelings.
I love that, the window of tolerance.
Mm.
For those listening that don't know how to approach the feelings and the emotions that they have that are more challenging, a lot of people shut down when they're feeling difficult things, or they are around other people that feel difficult things, that are feeling difficult things. How do they begin? Because what you're saying, it's really like, I get it, and having processes that you can do on your own, as well as seeking therapists and practitioners that can support you one-on-one, as well as community and friends and groups. But there's a place before that for people that are really, really shut down, that don't know how to open that door without feeling like everything's going to fall apart.
What I find a really helpful mantra is to first and foremost honor your defenses. And in psychological terms, a defense is some mechanism that has evolved to protect you from difficult or potentially overwhelming feelings or emotional states. And it's really the same as, a hedgehog has spikes to protect it from threats or predators. So we develop these defenses. And I don't think it's helpful just to break through or even have an idea that we can break through our defenses just to get into the darkness or get into whatever's under the surface. I don't think that's a helpful approach. So I feel like that is the first thing, is to be aware. And you might need help with this and you might not. I think most people probably have some sense of the ways in which they have learned over time to protect themselves from emotional states that they are worried about, that they think would be overwhelming. And, there's a whole list of different defenses, but there's, repression, there's distraction, there's going off into fantasy, there's getting busy and doing things, there's numbing, there's dissociation. There's a lot of different ways that we protect ourselves, but I think the first thing is just really acknowledge and honor those defenses that have really served to protect you. That's what they're there for, is that they've served to protect you. So it's not about trying to break them down and get to some other place. If we do take time to really honor and acknowledge our defenses, just get good at noticing them, knowing them, and you can even cultivate appreciation for them. You can say, I really honor and appreciate my defenses and all the work that they've done for all these years to protect me from feelings of deep shame or vulnerability, or even just protecting me from other people who, if they saw me in a vulnerable state, might actually have bullied me or attacked me or worse. So these defenses are really important. And then once you have honored and acknowledged them, I think it's helpful to reframe a bit. If some people may have an idea about emotions that they've received from their family or from the society in which they live. And we all have some stories about emotions that we've received. The typical sort of story that I hear about is, and this is Western culture in particular, that we have for a long time now prioritized happiness over all other feelings. And chasing happiness, the pursuit of happiness, is even enshrined in like the American Constitution. So it's got quite deep roots, this idea that happiness is the only emotion that's worth anything and worth pursuing. But of course, we know now more and more from, the science, the biology, the studies of other cultures and indigenous cultures, that all these other emotions have so much to offer us. There's so much, like we were talking about, inner wisdom. I don't think you can access your inner wisdom unless you can really make a space for and tune into the different emotions, because those emotions carry wisdom, in my opinion. Fear carries wisdom, anger carries wisdom, sadness carries wisdom, grief carries wisdom. So I think it can really help also just to open to that possibility that emotions are here as messengers, sacred messengers from our body and our evolution to teach us something if we can just start to develop a better relationship with them.
Yeah, absolutely. The quest to always be like happy and productive, and it doesn't really allow for the whole human creative experience of being alive, which has so many different facets. And often those periods where we're not feeling the most creative or the most inspired often lead to the periods where we are. I feel like sometimes there's a desire to kind of then like pathologize it and be like, oh, well, that was like a bad time. And then I had this really good period, and not to understand that maybe that part of the same cycle. And maybe we have to go through times that are more quiet, more uninspired, perhaps that connect us deeper to grief as we're in cycles of transformation, and then that will lead to something. But it's like if we take the pressure off what that needs to be and when that needs to be and how that needs to be, allow the innate creative process that it is to be a human to be experienced more deeply.
Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think of Martin Pastel. He is a wisdom keeper from Mexico, and he has written some beautiful books, one of which is called The Smell of Rain on Dust, which I just love that title. It's so beautiful. And it's a book about grief. He represents his people's and his ancestors' wisdom on grief in this book. And I mean, the main thing and the recurring message is that we cannot have a healthy life and a healthy culture unless we grieve. And we can't love and we can't celebrate and we can't appreciate unless we allow ourselves to grieve. So in his people's framework, grief is the other side of praise. And grief is the way that we express out loud our love and praise for the things that we have lost. And it doesn't have to be people, of course. It can be, the planet, the species that are dying. It can be at losing those precious moments of connection with each other and with your children that we were talking about earlier in this age of the attention economy. So for me, I just think the work of grief and really honoring grief as a channel to something is just so vital. It's so vital.
And I know grief has been such a powerful part of your work and what you've been doing with a part of me. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So part of me is a charity, and our mission is to help children who experience loss or trauma to feel less alone. And we started about 7 years ago now when I was working in a hospice in Hackney. I was counseling families and children and young people, either when somebody had a life limiting illness or after somebody had died. And in that time, I started to see the sort of the really damaging effects of a grief that's not held in the right way, especially for young people, especially for adolescents, which adolescence is a rite of passage in itself. And so if you experience a profound grief in adolescence, particularly around losing a parent, it's like a double rite of passage because suddenly your identity, which you're already exploring and trying to figure out who you are, it can get just sort of blown to pieces. It's really hard to navigate that. So we created some services and products to help children and young people through that. So we made a therapeutic mobile game that really helps young people on their journey through grief and helps them to build connections with others around them. And we have a service called the Guides program where we're training young people to hold grief spaces for other young people. And that's been particularly beautiful to see young adults who've been through a profound loss and then coming out the other side and just with, with a little bit of support, not huge amounts, just being able to hold these really strong but tender spaces for other young people who are going through grief. That's one of the things that inspires me, actually, and gives me hope, is when I see some of that energy and willingness to explore these, uncomfortable areas. When I see that in young people that I come into contact with, whether it's through a part of me or other work that I do, I find that just fills me with quite a lot of hope and inspiration. Certainly different. It was certainly different when I was a teenager. I was not open, really not open to that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's so beautiful that that's happening and that those spaces are open. I know I took all of my grief out on the dance floor and the curbside drinking when I was a teenager. If someone had offered me spaces to actually really get to connect in that way, uh, yeah, I mean, incredible.
And also, I do want to make a reference to the dance floor because it's been an important part of my journey too. From definitely taking out my difficult feelings on the dance floor as a teenager in Manchester, and when I started going raving, it really was. When I look back, I'm really grateful for those times, but also it wasn't very held. It was chaotic and carnage a lot of the time. There's also something beautiful and important about it, and now I'm a bit older and a little bit wiser. I find so much in dance and movement practices. Like, I really want to sing the praises of these things for anyone who might not already be tuned into them. And for me, it's particularly five rhythms is my devotion and my practice, and the way that it allows me to connect with my grief and my rage and joy, like just so much joy in a space where whoever's in that space, no matter what shape, size, color of skin, whatever leaning or identity you have, it completely dissolves in that space. And for me, that is just such a really precious thing. So I really wanted to, just give a little plug to Five Rhythms. Or movement, dancing and movement in general, but particularly for me, Five Rhythms is such a beautiful practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, my days of Derby and Leeds, being out and dancing and staying up late, it was the best therapy that was available at the time. And it was a space for me that was really raw and honest in a way that other areas of my life didn't seem to be, where people really talked and as well as danced and shared and moved energy. Now we have five rhythms and these more conscious spaces where you get that space to release through your body and to connect with people without the other elements that can send you down other rabbit holes and bring in a different energy into that space. And I just remember the first time I went to Five Rhythms, I couldn't believe how much fun it was. I was like, and I was dancing.
I was exactly the same. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and just like when you get into that chaos and you're like, and everyone's jumping and you're like, wow, and everyone's sober, but you're just in your bodies and that collective energy. And then also being in the slower, softer rhythms. For me, I was like, wow, I haven't got to dance like this since I was a kid, like bringing more of like the inner ballerina out, that journey of discovering five rhythms. So yes, anyone that has not been to five rhythms or ecstatic dance or any of these things, please come. It's really wonderful.
It is so good. It is so good. And the other thing I was thinking, which I'm so fascinated by this, Amisha, I wonder what you think, is, in the 80s, late 80s, when I was going out raving and experimenting with all sorts of different things, a lot of the things that we were experimenting with then are now part of this movement of psychedelic therapy. Like, all those things are now part of this big movement of healing people, which I find that so interesting. like, I think what you said really was spot on, that that was the best therapy that was available at the time. And somehow we were seeking it out, these experiences that weren't contained. But now, seeing it sort of go full circle with this sort of big movement around using things like MDMA and, psilocybin and ketamine to help people heal from mental health problems, just find that so interesting.
It's really extraordinary. And I'm really excited to see kind of how that develops as it becomes more commonplace. Because, yeah, these medicines, when they're held right and with the right support, they have this incredible capacity to open up our perception of ourselves and to see things from a different way and to connect deeper in relationships. I find that the MDMA weekends that couples can go on to like work through everything that's coming up in a long-term relationship, I have heard incredible things about. I was with a friend this week who's in a 15 years into a marriage and said that, without going to ceremonies and having spending time with Michael Pollan and all of the things that they've been doing together as a couple, that they would be really struggling to be in a healthy monogamous relationship. And so, yeah, this is a new space that's coming in to therapy, and I'm really excited for what it might be able to do. And also just to add, like, it's great to do these things in a way where they're really held.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are potential harms that are important to acknowledge with these things, even in spaces that are, it's ostensibly held. It's quite difficult, I think, to know, or to be sure, because there's no regulation properly. There's no guidance. And I know there's lots of things happening in different ways. Some of them more underground, some of them more overground. It's quite hard to know. And I believe in tuning into our capacity for discernment. I just think that is so important. It's a lesson I've had to learn, like, the hard way, actually, along the way, where I've been in situations where I've kind of been with some powerful teacher or therapist or guru, and I'm feeling maybe vulnerable, and they're sort of saying things in a very powerful and direct way, and I'm very in a state of being easily influenced. But where I've come back to, and what's helped me navigate those times, is just to bring myself back to my own discernment, and just to really build that capacity to sort of know and trust what is good for me. And I think we can have a sense of that with the people that we come into contact with. Like, I have clients who ask me, "What do you think about this retreat? What do you think about this ceremony? What do you think about this person?" Obviously, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to give advice and guidance without actually knowing these people. But the best I can say is just really tune in to your own sense and your own discernment. And I think you can hopefully make wise choices that way.
What comes to me is everything is not for everybody all the time. And what might be a really powerful, profound, perfectly timed, well facilitated experience for someone might not be for you, even if it's the same person and the same, we're all so unique that with every transformative experience or opportunity, there is also the resistance pattern and the protection. So with our discernment, it's quite complicated because we have to also discern whether our discernment is like, oh no, that's not for me, or even like there's something really dodgy going on over there, which there often is. And there's also an inbuilt protection that can stop us from really wanting to change and trust someone and go through that bit that's really difficult, which is often in the second bit, not the first bit of the interactions. This all comes back to everything that we've been talking about, that relationship with our inner authority. But maybe it's helpful just to know that that is part of it, and it's not always easy as well to know what you got from something straight away.
100%. And I love the point that you made about why it can be tricky to tune into whether an experience or a person is right for us, because there can be all sorts of resistances coming up. And that is such a subtle and tricky thing, when to surrender, when to open yourself up, because, in some experiences, you can open yourself up and surrender and let go, and you can have beautiful, profound healing experiences. And sometimes that can happen and you can end up being really wounded. And it's a tricky dance. And I definitely don't have a perfect answer to that, other than it's really good for me that we're talking about this and naming these patterns in the healing process, and that we're having a conversation about them. I think that's so important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel into this a lot, and it's really hard to know like what's safe, like quote unquote safe, or what's like, what's a good modality. And obviously we're in a world now where some people have a lot of training, some people have less training, some people have more like intuitive capacity, some people are more rigid. So it's not even that the training and the qualifications necessarily are the thing to focus on, because it could be that somebody that has lots of trainings might be very stuck in their ways and not able to be as open about somebody that's in front of them. And it might be also the other way around. And of course people have natural abilities, and that we are in a time of reclaiming our intuition, and people might have ancestral lineages that come through that are not the things that are being certified. And I know this is going to come up very much in the space of psychedelic therapy, where who gets the licenses, like we don't yet know. Is that going to be people that are qualified in a certain way? It might be people that are qualified in a certain way rather than people that are experienced in a certain way, because some of it's underground and overground and all of this. So yeah, it's a complicated world out there. And I guess I can only liken it to like relating in general is also complicated. Like we don't know, when we make friends or when we choose a partner, we don't know everything about them. We don't know if we're going to get more wounded, or if we're going to, if we're going to really like become our best selves, or if both of those things are going to happen. And so having support around us that helps us to connect into our emotional maturity, and to also to be with us in all of the processes of expansion and wounding, feels like so important for this time, which actually brings us back to what we were saying at the beginning about those structures of community and support and connection.
Mm. One of the things that I find quite beautiful about psychotherapy when it's working well is that some of these like subtle and complex relational things about trust and opening up or being protected and defended, you can really work through those things in a gentle and curious way in a therapeutic relationship that it's quite difficult to get that, I think, in other contexts. If we might have some people around us who can support us in that, we can have really open and honest conversation. I think that is the future that we want to build. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to acknowledge what you're saying about relating, and sort of give a bit of a plug to like good quality psychotherapy. What it can do is just really work with those things as they're coming up, about, yeah, those really subtle things that you described, of sort of when might we be contracting, when might we be opening up, what feels safe, what doesn't feel safe, supporting people to develop their own boundaries and their own capacity to open up and to close down in a relational context.
And what are some good green flags when finding your good quality psychotherapist?
The first thing is just your actual sense of them when you meet them. And it's really important to remember that you can meet a number of different ones before you decide the one that you might want to work with. And that's completely okay. And it's completely normal. Like I have lots of people who come to me who, we have that conversation at the start, let's see if this feels like a right fit or not. And it's not always possible to discern that at the start, but it's also good to know that if you don't feel like it's working, that you can actually, and I really feel this important, bring that up in the session, in the relationship, and the way that the person responds and holds that will give you a lot of information about that person. Because often the stuff that's getting in the way, we don't know if it's coming more from us, from them, from the field in between us. So these are the things that you just have to sort of try and test out. And then obviously there is actually some regulation. So there is a register of psychotherapists who have qualifications. There's BACP and UKCP in the UK, and there's different bodies in other countries.
What's your call to action that you want to leave everyone with today? And there can be one that's more on the inner level, as well as maybe an organization or something that we can engage with.
I think what flows from this conversation today, the first thing that comes to mind as an inner call to action is for those who are on some kind of a healing path to really honor and have compassion and appreciation for your defenses. That would be the inner call to action. And the outer one would be the more beautiful tomorrow that we want to create really starts from now. It really starts from the next thing that you do. So whatever the next thing that you do when you stop listening to this podcast is, I really believe, and it's important to realize how much those small gestures can ripple up in different ways that are impossible to predict. So rather than getting lost with the big picture of, oh gosh, the world is like this and my life is like this and I need to do X, Y, and Z, just really focus on the next step. What's the next step and the next gesture that you can do that can be sowing the seeds for the more beautiful tomorrow that you want to see?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Louis. And can you share your website and how you would like everyone to connect with you deeper from this conversation?
My website is louisweinstock.com, and I have a newsletter that people can sign up to. And then there's A Part of Me, the charity, which is apartofme.app.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your wonderful open approach to all of this.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode and it has sparked some inspiration and creativity in you. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on allthatweare.org. We give space to our guests to share their perspective without debating it or fact-checking, as this approach allows for deep, unedited conversations from the heart. We trust your discernment and wisdom to take what is useful and challenge what isn't in your own understanding. We offer spaces for discussion and integration in our membership community, which we would love for you to join. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our beautiful community. If you loved this and would like to connect more deeply with us, please join our membership. You choose what you contribute based on our sliding scale, and you become a patron whose support makes this podcast happen, as well as receiving access to a library of many resources and invitations to nourishing events. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review wherever you listen so others can find us. This podcast is made by an all-female global team. Me, Amisha Gadiali, producer and host, Anna Greta Folderbach, who crafts the words that accompany each episode, and Mary Chan, who edits the sound so skillfully. All That We Are celebrates all that we are already and the untapped potential that lives inside us. It invites the full power of the more than human world, nature, the unseen, our ancestors, and our future generations. It reminds us that we never exist in silo, through borders, timelines, or polarity, that in each and every moment, all that we are is here.